Before the first light prologue, before this universe, there was another. It was a cosmos of incomprehensible scale, ruled by titans who shaped reality with their will alone. They forged stars with a thought, they unraveled galaxies with a whisper, but even gods are not eternal. When their universe began to die, they refused to fade with it. They built a vessel, a world larger than planets, a ship that could outrun oblivion itself. They called it Ashkar. But their plan failed. They did not escape the end of their universe. Instead, they became trapped, sealed within the ship, imprisoned by those who once worshipped them. Their power was bound, their names forgotten, and Ashkar was cast adrift in the void, until now. Something has found it, a signal, a pulse of energy, a whisper across the cosmos, and deep within Ashkar, behind walls forged to last beyond time itself, the gods are waking. Chapter 1. The Signal. The signal came from the void, a pulse of energy, ancient beyond comprehension, stretching across the blackness between stars. On the bridge of the deep space vessel Horizon Spear, Captain Rissa Vale watched the data stream unfold in shifting waves of impossible mathematics. Her crew murmured around her, their voices edged with uncertainty, their screens awash with unknown symbols. "This can't be right," murmured Sykes, the ship's chief navigator. He swept a hand through the holographic map, expanding the waveform into a three-dimensional lattice of golden light. "It's older than the Big Bang. The computer's trying to date it, but the numbers just loop." Rissa narrowed her eyes. "Loop?" Sykes nodded, his mouth pressed into a thin line. "As if time itself doesn't apply to this thing." Dr. Amara Tay, the ship's xenoarchaeologist, leaned closer, her dark eyes alight with fascination. "It's not just a signal. It's a beacon, and it's still broadcasting." A cold ripple ran down Rissa's spine. Something out there was calling to them, and it had been calling long before their universe even existed. She turned toward Lieutenant Orlin Jex, her security officer, who stood rigid beside the comm station. His instincts, honed from years of deep space operations, radiated unease. "We should leave this alone, Captain," he said, his voice low. "Nothing good comes from answering a message this old." Rissa exhaled slowly, considering. The Horizon Spear wasn't just a ship. It was humanity's furthest-reaching expedition into the unknown, a vessel built for uncovering the great cosmic mysteries. And this was the greatest mystery of all. "Set a course," she ordered. "Take us to the source." The arrival space broke around them when they arrived. The stars seemed to bend, their light curving unnaturally toward a single point in the void. And there, drifting in the abyss, was something no human had ever laid eyes upon. A ship, if it could even be called that, Ashkar, a monolith of black metal so massive it eclipsed planets. It bore no markings, no visible propulsion, no signs of life. Its surface was ancient, worn by the passage of countless eons, yet somehow touched by time. The crew stood in stunned silence as the ship's scanners struggled to make sense of it. Tay whispered first. "It's not just old. It's impossible." Sykes shook his head. "I can't get a solid reading. There's mass, but it fluctuates. I don't even know if it's entirely in our reality." Jex's fingers twitched over his holster. "I don't like this." Rissa barely heard them. Her gaze was locked on the center of the structure, where a single, massive gateway loomed, as though waiting. The signal pulsed again, stronger this time, an invitation or a trap. The boarding. They breached the ship's hull at what appeared to be an ancient docking station, their shuttle settling into the eerie silence like an intruder. The airlock hissed open, revealing a corridor that stretched into infinite darkness. The walls were immense, carved with symbols older than human language, pulsating faintly with some unknowable power. The air was still, too still. Rissa activated, her helmet light. "Stay together, no one goes off alone." As they advanced, their footsteps barely echoed. The floor beneath them felt wrong, solid but not quite real, like walking across the surface of a dream. Then came the whispering, soft, indistinct, just at the edge of hearing. Tay stopped, eyes widening. "Did you hear that?" Jex's hand was already on his weapon. "I heard something." Sykes swallowed hard. It sounded like my name. Risa's pulse quickened. This ship had been sealed for eons. Nothing should be alive here. Nothing. And yet, the deeper they moved into the ship, the more the whispers grew, like 1,000 voices speaking at once, like something waking up. The awakening. They reached what looked like an ancient control chamber, vast, circular, lined with towering monoliths of black stone. At its center stood a dais glowing faintly with golden light. Symbols shifted across its surface, alive. Tay stepped forward, her breath shallow. This isn't just a ship. Jex tightened his grip on his rifle. Then what is it? Tay hesitated. A prison. Silence. Then the ground shook. A deep, resonant sound filled the chamber like the groan of something immense stirring after an eternity of slumber. The whispers became voices, rising in a cacophony of anger, of hunger. The golden light flared and the air split open. A figure stepped forth, not a man, not a machine, something in between, its form shifting, fracturing, struggling to hold a shape. Its eyes, if they could be called that, locked onto them, and then it spoke. "You should not be here." Darkness rushed forward, swallowing the light, and the screaming began. Chapter 2. The first god, the darkness swallowed them whole. A force unlike anything they had ever encountered, cold, absolute and hungry, descended on the chamber. The golden light that had flickered so briefly was gone, consumed by the abyss, that surged forward like a living thing. Captain Risa Vale felt the world shift around her. One moment, she was in the control chamber of the ancient ship Ajakar. The next, she was nowhere. Her ears rang. The sound of screaming had stopped, but she didn't know if that was because it had ended, or because she was no longer able to hear it. Then, a voice spoke. Not in sound, not in words. It bypassed language, burrowing straight into her thoughts like claws digging through her mind. "You have trespassed." Risa's breath hitched. She tried to move, but the darkness held her frozen in place. Around her, shadowy shapes pulsed in and out of reality, shifting like oil on water. She glimpsed something, vast, moving beyond the veil. A silhouette. Against a deeper blackness, a presence, a god. And then light returned. The broken world, Risa collapsed onto cold stone. Her hands scraped against the rough surface, and she gasped for air, her lungs burning as if she had been holding her breath for hours. The ship was gone, or rather, it had changed. She pushed herself up, scanning the area. She was standing in what looked like a ruinous city, towers of black stone rising around her like shattered ribs. The sky was wrong, a swirling vortex of green and violet clouds, illuminated by a sun that flickered as if undecided whether to exist. She wasn't alone. A few feet away, Lieutenant Orlin Jex stirred, his security armor smeared with a dark, oily substance. He groaned, rolling onto his side, reaching instinctively for his weapon, only to find it gone. "Jex!" Risa rushed to his side, gripping his arm. "Are you okay?" He blinked at her, his pupils dilated. "Where are we? I don't know." Further off, Dr. Amarate and Sykes lay sprawled across the ground, stirring awake. But that was it. The rest of the boarding team gone, or worse. Tay sat up, pressing a hand to her temple. What happened? 1 minute we were in that chamber, then... The light went out, Sykes muttered. He was staring at the sky, his face pale. And... something took us. Jex rose, scanning the surroundings. "Where the hell is the ship?" Risa turned slowly, taking it all in. Ajkar was no longer a vessel. It was a world, or a memory of one. "We're inside it," Tay whispered, realization dawning. "This isn't just a ship. It's an entire civilization, folded into itself. A prison and a tomb." Jex exhaled sharply. "Then what the hell brought us here?" Shadow moved between the ruined towers, and the voice returned. One remembers. The first god from the darkness between the crumbling monoliths it emerged, a figure tall beyond reason, clad in shifting plates of golden-black metal, its form flickering like a projection cast across fractured dimensions. It had no face, only a vast, featureless mask where one should be, and in the center a single crack ran down its length, leaking ribbons of dark energy. Jex raised his hands instinctively, positioning himself between the creature and the others. "Identify yourself," he barked, though his voice wavered. The entity tilted its head as if observing them. "You walk among graves." The words struck deep. They weren't spoken, yet they filled the air like a pulse of raw force. Risa clenched her jaw, forcing herself to meet its gaze, or what should have been its gaze. "Who are you?" she demanded, a pause. Then, "I am that which remains." A wind, sudden and violent, tore through the ruins. The ground shuddered, and for a split second Risa saw something behind the figure, a vast chamber, filled with endless rows of monolithic statues, each one identical. To the being standing before them, thousands, maybe millions, standing frozen in time. And then the vision snapped away. Tay's voice was breathless. "This isn't just a ship, it's a mausoleum." The being turned toward her. Correction. The shadows writhed, and suddenly, the air felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. "It is a war prison." The fall of Azakarissa felt her heartbeat hammering. The weight of truth settled over them. Azkar was not just a lost ship drifting through the void. It was the final battlefield of a war that predated the very fabric of their reality, a war between those who had created universes and those who had sought to consume them. Jex exhaled, voice tight. "Who did this? Who imprisoned you?" The figure did not answer. Instead, it moved, an impossible glide forward, closing the space between them. They tensed, but it did not strike. Instead, it showed them. A ripple passed through the air, and suddenly, they were standing in a different time. The ruins around them rebuilt themselves, rising, reshaping. Sky became clear, twin suns burning in the heavens, and before them the city of Ashkar lived again. Massive structures of obsidian and gold loomed, and in the distance a colossal gateway pulsed with raw energy, a portal to the spaces between realities. Then the war began. Towers collapsed in waves of golden fire. The air split apart, void-born horrors pouring through the cracks in reality. Figures of impossible scale, gods and titans, clashed in battle, their voices shaking the very bones of the universe. And at the heart of it all, one name burned in Risa's mind. Vorkyle. She gasped, the vision fracturing, snapping her back to the broken present. The being loomed over them, its voice reverberating through the shattered reality. "You have woken the last war." The shadows swarmed, and the world collapsed into chaos. Chapter 3. The Last War. The world fractured. One moment, Risa and her crew stood before the godlike being, its form shifting between past and present. The next, the air itself ripped apart, a shockwave blasting through the ruins as something immense surged into existence. A storm of light and shadow churned in the sky above, twisting into the outline of something vast, its form struggling to manifest. The ruins beneath them groaned, the stone cracking as the weight of an unseen force bore down on reality. Jex staggered back, shielding his eyes. "What the hell is happening?" Tay clutched her head, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not just a war prison. It's a battlefield still locked in time. We've triggered it. It's starting again." The god before them, the last warden, raised a hand and the sky tore open. The unseen enemy, 1,000 voices screamed from the rift above, a soundless wail that echoed through the bones of the world. From the breach, figures began to descend. Not ships, not creatures, but something in between. Twisting, multi-limbed horrors unfolded from the void, their forms shifting like liquid metal. Their faces, if they had any, were smooth and reflective, each one showing warped and distorted visions. Of the past, Sykes gasped. "They're mirrors?" Risa's breath caught as she saw her own reflection in one of the entities, but it wasn't her now. It was her as a child, staring back in mute terror. Then the creature moved. The mirrored abomination lashed forward, an arm splitting into tendrils of glass and shadow, streaking toward them. Risa dove, pulling Tay out of the way as the attack shattered the ground where they had just stood. Jex opened fire, his sidearm roaring in the still air. Plasma rounds struck the creature, but instead of penetrating, the impacts rippled, the energy bending backward. The shots came back at him. Jex barely dodged as his own bullets tore past, scorching the ruins behind him. "Weapons are useless," he shouted. "It's absorbing and redirecting." The last warden moved. With a single step, it crossed the battlefield, raising an arm wreathed in golden fire. It struck out, and an arc of pure destruction erupted forth, cleaving through the closest abomination. The creature screamed, its mirrored form cracking before it was torn apart, shattering like glass into the void. But more were coming. Hundreds. Thousands. And at the center of the breach, a shape coalesced, larger than all the rest, more complete. Towering form of void-born metal and burning eyes, clad in an aura of writhing shadows. Its name seared itself into Risa's mind. Vor-Kyle. The Titan awakens. The battlefield froze. For a single breath, all things, light, shadow, time itself, seemed to bow to the figure standing at the heart of the breach. Vor-Kyle was no mere entity. It was the first of them, the Harbinger, the one who had unmade entire realities before their universe had even been born. It lifted a hand, and the stars themselves dimmed. Then it spoke. The cycle begins again. A wave of black fire erupted from Vor-Kyle's form, sweeping across the ruins. The ground splintered, monoliths crumbling as an unstoppable force of entropy spread outward. The warden raised both arms, shielding the crew as golden barriers, flared into existence. But even the divine energy wavered against the onslaught. "We can't stay here," Risa shouted over the howling storm of destruction. The warden turned its featureless face toward her. For a moment she thought it would refuse. Then it spoke. "Follow." And the world broke apart again. The descent, the eye. Next thing Risa knew, she was falling. Not through air, not through space, through something else. The ruins, the battlefield, the war, they were above now, distant and unreachable, as she and her crew plummeted through layers of shifting light. Her body felt weightless, yet unbearably heavy at the same time. Then, impact. She landed hard on cold metal. Gasping, she pushed herself up, her vision swimming. They were in a vast chamber, not a ruin, not a battlefield, a tomb. Towering structures lined the walls, covered in inscriptions that seemed to rewrite themselves as she looked at them. In the center of the chamber stood a single massive sarcophagus, its surface marked by chains of light that pulsed with faint energy. And beside, Duty the warden stood, its golden form dimmed, its energy flickering. "Where?" Jex started, coughing. "Where the hell are we?" The warden turned toward the sarcophagus. Its voice was weaker now. "The last seal." Tay's eyes widened in understanding. This is what's keeping Vor-Kyle from fully manifesting. The war never truly ended. It was just paused. The realization hit them all at once. Ajkar wasn't a battlefield. It was a failsafe, a prison not just for the war, but for the god that had nearly ended all things. And now, because of them, that prison was failing. Risa turned to the warden. "Can we stop it? Can we reseal him?" The warden's voice faltered. For the first time, there was something in it that almost sounded like doubt. Unknown. Above them, the void rumbled, and the last war began again. Chapter 4. The Breaking of the Seal. The walls trembled. Energy surged through the chamber, crackling in jagged arcs across the towering sarcophagus. The chains of light that bound it flickered, their radiance waning, struggling against an ancient force that had been held back for eons. Risa clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm, to think. Every instinct in her screamed that this was wrong, that they had stepped into a war they couldn't possibly win. And yet, there was no turning back. Above, the ceiling of the tomb began to split, revealing the swirling maelstrom of the void beyond. Through the rupture, Risa could see the battle raging outside, if it could even be called that. The sky was a storm of gold and shadow, with beings of unimaginable scale locked in combat. The Warden's kin fought against the forces of Vorkyle, their divine forms flickering in and out of existence as the fabric of reality itself tore apart. Jex took a step forward, his face grim. "Captain, we have a problem." She turned to follow his gaze, and her stomach dropped. The chains were breaking. Each link, once solid and pulsing with celestial energy, now looked thin, strained, as if something was pulling them apart from inside. The sarcophagus shuddered, and a deep rhythmic sound echoed through the chamber. A heartbeat. Tay's voice was breathless. "It's waking up." "The choice. We need to reinforce the seal," Risa snapped, turning to the Warden. "Tell us how." The Yase, towering entity, stood motionless for a long moment, its golden form flickering, its power fading. When it finally spoke, its voice was weaker than before, as if sustaining its presence was taking everything it had. "Only one way." Risa frowned. "What is it?" The Warden slowly raised an arm and pointed. To her, a pit formed in her stomach. "What?" The Warden's voice reverberated, the weight of its words pressing into her skull. "A soul must take the seat of the fallen." Silence. The realization hit hard. The Warden was failing because it was alone. It had been one of many wardens, keepers, jailers of a force beyond mortal comprehension. But now, after untold millennia, it was the last. And to restore the seal, another had to take its place. Jex's eyes narrowed. "You're saying someone has to become like you?" The Warden did not move. It did not need to. The answer was clear. Rissa's breath was shallow. She had known sacrifice before. She had lost people. She had made impossible decisions, but this, she would not just die. She would become something else. Tay's voice was barely above a whisper. "There has to be another way." The Warden's energy flickered again. The battle above worsened, and the sarcophagus shuddered violently. Time was running out. Risa closed her eyes, breathed, steeled herself. Then she stepped forward. "Tell me what I have to do." The ascent. The Warden raised its hands. A golden light flared around its form, illuminating the chamber in a brilliance so intense it burned. The sarcophagus trembled, its surface cracking as the chains of light pulsed. Violently, fighting against the force that sought to break free. Then, with a final shudder, the Warden placed a hand on Rissa's chest. "You must accept the burden. Pain. Not physical, not even mental. Something deeper, something primal, tore through her. She felt herself unraveling, her body dissolving into light and sound, her very being pulled into something far greater than herself. She saw the beginning, not just of the war, but of everything. The first light, the first song, the birth of the stars and the slow, creeping dark that came after. She saw Vorkyle before it was named, a thing of infinite hunger, a force beyond gods, devouring realities not because it wanted to, but because it must. And she saw the Wardens, beings, forged not to rule but to hold the line. She understood at last what had to be done. Rissa Vale ceased to be, and in her place something else took shape. The final battle. The chamber exploded in golden light, sending a shockwave rippling through the battlefield above. The chains that had been on the verge of breaking suddenly strengthened, reforging themselves with newfound power. Above, Vorkyle roared, its void-born form recoiling as the prison held fast. Jex and the others were thrown back, shielding their eyes from the radiance that now poured from the sarcophagus. And standing at its center, where Risa had once been, was a new Warden, golden, vast, burning with the light of 1,000 stars, yet still her, still Risa. She turned her gaze skyward, her voice echoing across the battlefield, and with a single gesture the heavens split apart. A legion of new wardens emerged from the light, summoned forth by the rekindling of the seal. They descended upon the forces of Vorkyle, striking with divine fury, their power pushing the entity back. The void howled. The war shifted, and Vorkyle, for the first time in an eternity, retreated. The end of the beginning, the breach closed. DQ. Ruins fell silent. Jex, Tay, and Sykes slowly got to their feet, staring at the place where Rissa had once stood. Where she still stood, but different. Her form was golden, flickering between light and substance. Her eyes, once human, now burned with the same celestial fire as the wardens before her. She turned toward them, and for a brief moment, they saw recognition in her gaze. Then the last warden, now no longer the last, spoke. "It is done." A deep silence followed. The battle had ended. The war had been held back, but it was not over. Tay swallowed hard. Is she still in there?" The golden figure looked at her, and just for a moment, Rissa's voice, her real voice, broke through the celestial resonance. "Keep moving forward." Then she turned, stepping into the light, joining the wardens as they vanished into the stars. And the universe, for now, was safe. For now. Chapter 5. Embers of Divinity. The echoes of battle lingered in the void. The sky, if it could even be called that, still trembled from the clash between light and shadow, the remnants of celestial power crackling in the vastness above. But the breach was sealed. The war, for now, was held at bay, and Rissa was gone. Jex stood in the ruins of Ajkar, his fingers curled into fists at his sides. The golden radiance that had marked Rissa's transformation had faded into the distant horizon, swallowed by the unknowable reaches where the wardens now dwelled. He had seen her vanish into that endless light, her form no longer bound by flesh or mortality, but it still didn't feel real. Tay's voice was small. She spoke to us. That was her, right? Sykes wiped the dust from his face, his expression unreadable. I don't know, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Jex exhaled sharply. She's not dead. They turned to look at him. His voice was quiet, but there was a certainty in it, something firm. She's not dead, he repeated. She's, something else now, but she's still her, Tay swallowed. Then what do we do? Jex turned his gaze skyward, watching the last fading streaks of golden fire where Rissa had gone. We find a way to bring her back. The relics of the fallen. The ruins of Ajkar were changing. Where once they had been cold, lifeless stone, something had awakened. Faint lines of energy now traced across the monoliths, pulses of golden light coursing through ancient structures. Whatever power had been lying dormant here for millennia was now stirring. This place isn't dead anymore, Sykes muttered, scanning the shifting terrain with his visor. Something's waking up. Jex looked to the sky. The wardens were gone, but their power remained, a lingering force woven into the very foundation of Ajkar. If they were going to find a way to reach Rissa, it had to be here. Tay crouched near one of the newly glowing monoliths, brushing her fingertips over its surface. Symbols shifted beneath her touch, rewriting themselves, adapting. These aren't just inscriptions, they're instructions. Jex stepped closer. Instructions for what? She bit her lip, eyes darting as she tried to decipher the moving script. I think, for a way to follow them. A slow, heavy silence settled between them. You mean follow the wardens? Sykes asked. Tay nodded. If I'm right, Ajkar wasn't just a prison. It was also a pathway, a gateway between realms. The wardens didn't just leave. They ascended to something beyond. And this, she gestured at the glowing inscriptions. This might be how they did it. Jex exhaled. Then we're not done here. The veil between worlds, the deeper they ventured into Ajkar, the more the world around them shifted. The ruins seemed to fold inward, reality bending as ancient pathways unlocked. Space itself began to feel thinner, as if they were stepping between the threads of existence rather than walking on solid ground. The air shimmered, filled with whispers, not words but echoes, memories of something old. At the heart of it all, they found the gate. It was not a door in the traditional sense. No stone arch, no metallic frame, just a vast rippling tear. In reality, suspended in the air like a wound that had never fully closed. Within it there was no darkness, no stars, only an endless, swirling golden abyss. Sykes let out a low whistle. That doesn't look like any portal I've ever seen. Tay's fingers trembled as she reached out toward the rift. It's pure energy. Whatever's on the other side, it's not a place in the way we understand it. Jex stared at the shifting gateway. Risa had gone beyond this, and now they had a way to follow. A choice made in fire. Tay turned to the others. We don't know what's on the other side. If we step through, we might never be able to come back. Sykes crossed his arms. We knew what we were signing up for the moment we set foot on this damn planet. Jex didn't hesitate. We go. Tay looked at him, hesitation flickering in her eyes. Jex, she's still in there, Tay. His voice was steady. I don't care if she's a warden now. I don't care what she's become. She's still her, and I won't leave her alone in that place. For a long moment, Tay searched his face. Then she nodded. All right. Jex stepped forward. The golden abyss loomed before him, its light stretching into eternity. With one final glance back at the ruins of Ajkar, he inhaled sharply and stepped through. Beyond the light, it was like falling. No, like being unmade. For a moment, Jex felt as if he was nothing but energy, his body dissolving into pure motion. Then, just as suddenly, he reformed, stumbling forward onto solid ground. Except it wasn't ground. He stood on a plane of golden light stretching in all directions, shifting beneath his feet like rippling waves. Above him, an endless sky of swirling, formless radiance, and in the distance, standing at the center of it all, was her Risa. But not as she had been. She was vast, her form woven from celestial fire and divine presence. Her golden eyes burned with power. But there was still something human in them, some part of her that hadn't been lost. She turned toward them. When she spoke, her voice was no longer just hers. It was infinite. You shouldn't have come. Jex took a step forward. You're not getting rid of us that easily, Captain. A flicker of something, recognition, passed through her glowing form. I made my choice. Tay spoke softly. And now we're making ours. Risa hesitated. The golden waves beneath her pulsed with indecision. I am not who I was. I am something else now. Jex held her gaze. Then let us bring you back. The plane of light shuddered. In the far distance, beyond the golden horizon, a new presence stirred. A darkness that did not belong here. A force that had followed them. Vorkale. Risa's eyes darkened. You don't understand. I was holding him back. If I leave this place... A deep, bone-chilling voice rippled through the golden expanse. Then the cycle begins again. Jex gritted his teeth. Then we end it. The final battle had not been won. It had only just begun. Chapter 6. When Gods Tremble. The golden plane shook. The very fabric of this realm, this sanctuary beyond time, quivered as something vast and formless stirred at the horizon. A ripple of pure entropy spread outward, and for the first time, since ascending, Risa felt fear. Vorkale had found them. The darkness at the edges of existence coiled, shifting like a storm that had waited eternities to break free. And in its presence, the golden light of the wardens began to wane. Tay shivered as the oppressive force settled upon them. Tell me I'm not the only one who feels that. Sykes's hands went to his weapons, useless things in a place beyond mortal. Laws. It's worse than before. This isn't just Vorkale, it's something more. Jex clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stand firm against the crushing weight of the darkness. We didn't come this far to turn back now. We get Risa and we fight. Risa turned toward them, her celestial form flickering. You don't understand. If I leave this place, if I abandon the seat of the warden, nothing will hold it back. Jex met her gaze, fierce and unrelenting. Then we don't hold it back. We end it. The unchaining a distant roar, a sound older than the first star, deeper than the ocean of the void, tore through the golden expanse. The sky split, and from beyond, the veil, a shape emerged. Vorkyle was no longer bound by the rules of lesser realms. It had come fully into this space between gods and oblivion, its form twisting through layers of existence at once. It had been many things across the ages. A devourer of stars, a whisper in the cold places of the cosmos, a force without thought or will, only hunger. But now it saw them. A voice, or something that tried to be a voice, echoed across the golden waves. It was not speech as mortals understood it, but a raw, crushing presence, a weight against the mind that drowned all reason. You cannot win. The words splintered through existence like the tolling of a dying star. The weight of it drove Tay to her knees, forced Sykes to gasp for air as though he were drowning in a sea of unseen hands. But Jex stepped forward. His bones burned. His skin felt as though it would peel away, but he kept his eyes locked on the shifting mass of darkness, on the ancient thing that had consumed realities before theirs. Watch us. And then he ran. The final war begins. Rissa's celestial gaze snapped to him. Jex, no! But he was already in motion, his feet pounding against the unstable ground as he raced toward impossibility itself. He had no weapons that could slay a god, no divine fire burning in his veins, only will, and in that moment it was enough. The golden expanse reacted. Where Jex ran, light surged, as if this place, this realm beyond time, had been waiting for someone to act instead of fear. The chains of the wardens, the very bonds that had once imprisoned Vorkyle, rose anew. But they were not reforged as shackles. They became spears. Sykes saw it first. It's not a prison anymore, it's a damn armory. Rissa's golden gaze widened as she understood. The wardens had not been mere jailers. They had been warriors, and now, after eons of simply holding the darkness at bay, they were finally given a chance to strike. Jex reached the first of the burning lances, grasping it in both hands. The moment he touched it, reality fractured, memories not his own pouring into his mind. The first war, the forging of the seal, the last stand of those who came before. And then, power. Pure, undiluted power. Jex turned, the golden spear now, an extension of himself. Rissa, if you're still in there, then fight with us. She hesitated for only a second. Then she roared. Golden fire erupted around her, her celestial form shifting from passive guardian to something new. A warrior. A warden reborn. Not to hold the darkness back, but to bring the war to it. The sun spears strike for. Kale was not accustomed to resistance. It had always been an inevitability, a force that crushed civilizations like insects beneath an uncaring heel. Even the wardens of old had not defeated it, only delayed its return. But this was something new. Rissa moved first. She lifted both hands, and from the fabric of the realm itself, she called forth a blade of raw starlight. She moved like a sun-given form, a being of wrath and radiance, and when she struck, her blade tore through the void like lightning through a storm. Vorkyle screamed. The sound cracked the golden sky, sent ripples of devastation across the plain. The darkness lashed out, tendrils of entropy seeking to consume them, but the wardens, they did not break. Jex hurled the golden spear, and where it struck, entire fragments of Vorkyle's essence burned away. Sykes and Tay followed, their own weapons forged from the light itself, and as one, they fought. For the first time in the existence of the cosmos, Vorkyle was not the predator. It was the hunted. The end of infinity. The battle raged through time, and space through the very essence of what was and could be. Each strike from the wardens tore more of the darkness away, each wound something that could not be undone. And then, a final blow. Rissa lifted her blade high, every fragment of her, being burning with the light of every warden that had ever existed. The souls of the fallen rose beside her, the echoes of those who had once held the line, now striking the killing blow. Vorkyle screamed, its formless body shattering as the blade struck home. The darkness collapsed, not sealed, not imprisoned, destroyed. For the first time since the dawn of time, the great hunger was gone. Aftermath silence, the battlefield was gone. The golden plain was whole again, but it no longer pulsed with desperate energy. It was at peace. Jex collapsed onto his knees, breathing hard. Tay sat beside him, her eyes still wide with the sheer impossibility of what they had just done. Sykes chuckled, a raw, exhausted sound. Holy hell, we actually won. Jex turned to Risa. She stood at the heart of it all, her golden form dimming. No longer a being of endless power, but something in between, still radiant, still powerful, but mortal once more. She looked at them, small, tired smile on her lips. Took you long enough to come get me. Jex laughed, shaking his head. Wouldn't leave my captain behind. Risa exhaled, her gaze turning to the sky above, a sky now free. Then let's go home. And for the first time they could. Chapter 7. Echoes of the Unseen. The world beyond the veil was quiet. For the first time in an eternity, the tension of impending destruction had lifted, leaving behind only the gentle hum of a cosmos in recovery. The golden plain, once an arena of divine conflict, now felt like a forgotten temple, a sacred place of stillness and reflection. Jex sat cross-legged on the ground, his hands resting in his lap. His eyes were closed, though the fire of his soul still burned fiercely within him. He had lived through so many deaths, so many battles, and yet the peace now seemed as strange as the storm that had raged in the moments before. A soft voice broke the silence. How do you feel? Jex opened his eyes to find Risa standing before him. Her once blinding form had returned to a more mortal state, though the radiance still shimmered faintly around her. She had been silent since their victory, giving them all the space they needed to breathe and recover. He smiled wearily, reaching out to take her hand. Surprisingly peaceful. I think we all needed a moment to breathe. Risa nodded, her golden eyes reflecting something deeper than she had ever shown before. A quiet sorrow lingered in her gaze, something that Jex hadn't expected. Is it strange? She asked softly. To be alive again, but no longer as I was. Jex paused, his fingers tightening around hers. For all the victories they had claimed, there was something inevitable about the price they had paid. The gods had fallen, the balance had tipped. But at what cost? Maybe. But it doesn't matter. You're here, and that's what matters to me. She smiled, though there was a weight to her expression now. I don't know if I can ever be the person I was, but I'll find a way to make peace with that. A silence stretched between them before Jex rose to his feet. The world around them was still, but the weight of the universe felt palpable. A cosmic silence before the inevitable shift. I guess the next step is to figure out what happens now. Risa's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the fabric of the golden plain still shimmered. The remnants of the battle were gone, but something about the way the air trembled spoke of potential, of a new dawn rising on a universe no longer bound by old laws. We rebuild, she said quietly. Not just here, but everywhere. The Wardens were more than just protectors, they were guides, and we have a responsibility to carry that legacy forward. Jex met her gaze. A legacy of what? Risa's expression softened as she looked back to the horizon. A legacy of balance, of finding a way to unite the fractured realms, a way to ensure that we never face the horrors of the past again. And how do we start? One step at a time. The final assembly as they began their journey back to the shattered realms of existence, Jex couldn't help but feel a sense of dread hanging in the air. It wasn't the same dread they had felt when Vorkyle had risen to consume everything. It was something deeper. The unknown, the uncertainty, the emptiness left behind in the wake of divine destruction. A new world was rising from the ashes, but it had no clear form, no clear path. Rissa, Sykes, and Tay followed him as they traversed the void, a realm that felt both ancient and new at the same time. The shattered edges of their former battles flickered like dying stars in the distance, the remnants of their struggle still crackling in the ether. They arrived at the heart of creation, the place where the Wardens had once gathered to keep the forces of entropy at bay. It was a vast, hollow expanse, silent save for the soft echo of time itself, a place built from the very fabric of existence. In the center of the heart stood a single altar, its surface etched with symbols too ancient to understand. The altar was the last reminder of the Warden's divine presence, a relic of their timeless duty. Jex stepped forward, his boots echoing on the stone floor, his heart heavy with what they had accomplished and what they now faced. "This is where it began," he said quietly. "Where we all started." Rissa joined him at the altar, her fingers grazing the markings that covered its surface. "And this is where it will end." Jex raised an eyebrow. "You think this is the end?" "Not the end, but the beginning of something new, something that will span ages. We'll need to rebuild everything, the civilizations, the knowledge, the balance. And that begins here, by—" "What?" She turned toward him, a look of determination on her face. "By uniting the realms. By bringing back the Warden's strength. By becoming the ones who will lead the next generation." Jex's heart tightened. This was the moment. The one where they would either forge the future or let it slip away like dust through their fingers. "We can't do it alone," he said softly. "We'll need to find others. Others who still believe in the dream the Wardens fought for. And we will." But even as they spoke, the silence in the room deepened, as though something was watching them, waiting for them to make a decision. A shadow crept at the edges of the heart of creation, stretching long across the expanse. Sykes gripped his weapon tighter. "I don't like the feeling of this." The shadows shifted, moving like liquid across the floor, forming into a shape that seemed to grow in the darkness. The whispers began, low and insistent, an almost haunting presence that thrummed through the air. "We are not alone," Tay said, her voice quiet but sharp. Rissa's gaze narrowed and she took a step back, her hand moving to the celestial blade she had summoned during their battle. She didn't speak, but felt the familiar pull of ancient energy stirring in the air, and then from the shadows it emerged. A figure, a shadowed being, cloaked in darkness, its form indistinct but powerful. It moved like a predator through the void, an echo of something older than the universe itself. Jex felt the familiar weight of unease settling in his chest. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady but unsure. The figure stopped just before the altar, its features still obscured in shadow. It spoke in a voice that was like a murmur of thousands. "We are the keepers of what remains, and we have been watching, waiting, for the time to come again." The war was far from over. Chapter 8. The Gathering Dark. The darkness stretched further into the corners of the world, like an insidious fog that sought to choke the very breath of existence itself. The being that had emerged from the shadows, this enigmatic entity, so ancient that even the Wardens seemed unsure of its nature, had cast an oppressive weight upon the heart of creation. Rissa felt the pressure in her bones, the almost tangible malevolence radiating from the figure that loomed before them. It was as though all the battles, all the victories had amounted to nothing more than a brief flicker of light in an eternal, unyielding night. And yet, she stood her ground. "What do you want?" Jex's voice broke the silence, rough and steady. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade, though Rissa could feel the tension in his body, the uncertainty of facing an enemy like this, an enemy that had not been a part of their war against Vor Kyle. The shadowed figure tilted its head, its sapphire eyes gleaming from beneath the dark cowl. The voice that emerged was a chorus of whispers, an unsettling sound like wind through dry leaves. "You have broken the balance." Jex's grip tightened on his weapon. "We freed the realms. We did what was necessary." The figure's head jerked upward slightly, and though its form remained shrouded, a pulse of energy shot out from it, a wave of pressure that made the air feel heavy, thick with dread. What you call freedom is but a relinquishment, a disruption of the flow that keeps this universe whole. Nothing can escape the endless spiral of creation and destruction. You have merely delayed the inevitable. Sykes gritted his teeth, stepping forward to stand next to Jex. And who the hell are you to decide what's inevitable? You've been hiding in the darkness for far too long. The figure did not answer directly, but its presence seemed to grow, feeding on their words, their resistance. It was as though it drew strength from their defiance, bending the world around them like a living, breathing entity. I am the unseen, the echo of what was never meant to be. I have watched the rise and fall of stars, the birth of realms, and the slow, steady decay of all things. You, mere mortals, have dared to upset the balance. The price of that will be steep. The tension in the air became unbearable. The walls of the heart of creation seemed to tremble, as though the very fabric of reality was being stretched to its breaking point. Jex could feel the weight of this being's words, but there was something in him that refused to bow to this cosmic entity. "I don't care who or what you are," Jex said through gritted teeth. "If you're here to stop us, then try." Risa stepped forward, her eyes burning with golden fire. She raised a hand, and the air crackled with energy. "We are not afraid of you." The figure's laughter was low, like the rumble of thunder far off in the distance. "You think you have already won? Your victory was a fleeting moment, a trick played upon the universe. I am the keeper of that which should remain hidden, the forces that lie beyond even the reach of your gods. You cannot defeat me, for I am eternal." Risa's gaze never wavered, her voice now a commanding force. "I don't care if you are eternal. We will stop you." The ground beneath their feet shifted. A great, unseen force pressed against the very foundation of the realm, the essence of their world beginning to unravel in response to the entity's presence. Sykes' voice rose with determination. "Enough of this. Let's end it now." He reached for his weapon, but before his hand could make contact, the air around them rippled with an immense force, a crushing pressure that pushed them all to their knees. Risa's breath caught in her throat as she struggled to stay upright, her hands clutching at the ground. This power, it's not from any god, it is from the beginning, the first force, the one that exists beyond everything you know, the first breath of creation and the last whisper of death. I am the space between the moments, the pause before the next sound. I am the beginning and the end. The weight of its words pressed against them, suffocating, relentless. Jex struggled to lift his head, his body trembling with the effort. He was beginning to understand. This creature was not bound by the same laws of existence that they were. This being was not a god. They had fought gods before, but something far older, far deeper. "We don't need to understand who you are," Jex said through clenched teeth. "We just need to know that you're going down." With a final roar of defiance, Jex surged to his feet, golden energy crackling around him as he drew his blade. The blade of the Wardens, the one that had once held the darkness back. Now, it would serve as the instrument of their victory. Sykes, Tay, and Risa followed, their weapons blazing with the same fierce energy that had sustained them through the war against Vorkyle. They would not fall before this being. Risa raised her blade, its radiant form reflecting the fire of the universe. "We fight together. We fight for everything that's been lost, for the future." And as one, they charged. The struggle begins. The clash was unlike anything they had ever experienced. The force of the unseen being's power slammed against them, a tidal wave of pressure and entropy, but they did not falter. They fought as if the world itself depended on it. Jex's blade cut through the air, clashing against an unseen barrier, golden energy flaring with every strike. He was met with the entity's resistance, its power wrapping around him like a suffocating shroud. But Jex would not stop. He pressed forward, knowing that the very essence of reality hung in the balance. Rissa's golden light surged through her blade as she slashed at the air, trying to find some weakness in the shadowed being's form. But it was everywhere, and nowhere, its presence filling the void, making it impossible to gauge its true nature. Tay and Sykes were close behind, their weapons flashing through the space in deadly arcs, seeking to pierce through the darkness. But every time they struck, the entity's form seemed to shift, a liquid shadow that slipped through their grasp. It was as if the very fabric of existence was in constant flux, ever shifting, ever changing. Their weapons did not strike as they should, their blows losing their force the moment they came in contact with the entity. But Jex, relentless as ever, refused to let the shadow win. "Keep pushing. We can't stop." They did not give up even as the energy that surrounded them began to fade, even as the force of the being's power increased, pushing them back toward the edge of their existence. Then, in a single, decisive moment, Risa broke free. With a shout that echoed through the realms, she brought her blade down upon the entity, channeling the very power of the universe through her strike. The energy that pulsed around them shattered as the blade struck. The entity's form, for the first time the shadow recoiled, and the universe once again held its breath. Chapter 9. Fractured Destinies. The entity recoiled, its form shifting in an unnatural spiral, tendrils of darkness writhing as though it had been wounded for the first time in an eternity. The edges of reality trembled, the unseen forces binding. Existence together strained under the sheer weight of their conflict. Risa did not hesitate. The light from her celestial blade pulsed as she pressed forward, its golden brilliance carving through the void. "We end this now." Jex's breath was ragged, his body aching from the relentless struggle. But Risa's call stirred something deep within him. He charged beside her, his own blade igniting like a second sun. "No more delays. We finish what we started. Sykes." And Tay followed close behind, their weapons blazing with energy, their eyes burning with the same fire that had carried them through countless battles. The shadowed being twisted, retreating into the depths of the void. But it could not escape them now. They would not allow it. As they pursued, the void shuddered and the fabric of existence fractured. For a brief moment, Jex caught glimpses of other realms bleeding into their own. Visions of shattered civilizations, endless wars, and beings far beyond his comprehension. The entity whispered, its voice an echo from the dawn of time. "You do not understand what you unleash." Risa's grip tightened. "Then show us." The world collapsed around them. A war beyond time. The next breath Jex took was not in the heart of creation. He stood upon an impossible battlefield, suspended in an endless expanse where the sky burned with twin suns, casting their light over a war that had no beginning and no end. Monolithic figures clashed in the distance, giants draped in starfire, wielding weapons that cracked reality itself. Jex turned, searching for his companions, and saw Risa materialize beside him, her expression grim. "What is this place?" Sykes and Tay stumbled onto the battlefield a heartbeat later, their eyes wide with disbelief. This isn't real," Tay muttered, gripping her blade tighter. "This is something ancient, something forgotten." Before them, the entity stood, no longer an ethereal wraith but a figure fully formed, its silhouette jagged, shifting between the shapes of 1,000 warriors. Its voice thundered across the battlefield. "This is what came before. The war that gave birth to your gods, your world, your very existence. And it is not over." Jex clenched his fists. "Then we fight." The battlefield came alive. The titanic figures in the distance turned their gaze toward them, as if sensing the presence of new warriors. They charged, their movements causing the very air to ripple and distort. "Hold your ground!" Risa called, raising her blade high. The first of the giants swung its massive weapon, a blade as long as a mountain, but Jex dodged, rolling under the colossal strike. With a roar he leapt, slashing at the behemoth's knee, his blade slicing through time itself. Risa struck next, her golden fire lancing through the sky as she brought her weapon down in a devastating arc. The battlefield shook as the colossus howled in pain, its form flickering between past and future, as though existence itself were rejecting it. Sykes unleashed a barrage of piercing light, his energy cutting through the battlefield like a storm. Tay moved in a blur, her movements like a ghost among gods, striking at weak points unseen to mortal eyes. Yet even as they fought, the entity's laughter resonated through the battlefield. You still do not see. You are fighting ghosts, fighting echoes of a war that will never end. You cannot win. Jex gritted his teeth. Maybe not, but we can make damn sure you don't either. The skies cracked, and the battle surged forward into chaos. Fractured reality. The battle stretched on, an endless tide of conflict where time had no meaning. But Jex began to feel it, the strain. The world flickered. One moment, he was on the battlefield of gods. The next, he stood in an empty void, surrounded by shattered stars. He looked around frantically, searching for his allies, but saw nothing but an endless abyss stretching in all directions. And then, the entity appeared again, standing alone in the dark. Where are they? Jex demanded, his voice raw. The figure tilted its head. They are where they must be. As are you. Jex's grip tightened on his blade. Enough riddles, enough games. If you're going to kill me, do it. But I swear, I'll drag you down with me. The entity did not move. Instead, it raised a hand, and the void around them shifted. Memories, ones not his own, flashed before Jex's eyes. He saw a world before gods, a place of endless creation, where beings beyond comprehension wove the first threads of existence. He saw their fall, their desperate struggle to hold back something that should never have been awakened. He saw himself, or something that looked like him, standing in the ruins of that world, holding the same blade he wielded now, standing before the same entity. And then the truth struck him like a thunderclap. This isn't the first time, is it? The entity smiled. No, it is not. The weight of it settled over him. The battles, the wars, the endless cycles of destruction and rebirth. He had fought this war before, and he had lost over and over again. Jex staggered back, his mind reeling. Why don't I remember? The entity's gaze darkened. Because you are not meant to. You are meant to fight, to keep this battle going, forever. Jex clenched his fists, his body trembling. Then I'll break the cycle. I don't care what it takes. I don't care what it costs. This ends now. The entity regarded him for a long moment before speaking. We shall see. The void collapsed. The war began anew. Chapter 10. The Final Reckoning. The void collapsed, folding in upon itself like a dying star. Jex felt the pull of the abyss drag him through the fabric of reality, the weight of forgotten battles pressing against his mind. He barely had time to draw breath before he was thrown back into existence, landing hard on the fractured ground of a realm that should not exist. The sky above him churned like liquid fire, twisting between shades of deep violet and endless black. The very air crackled with an ancient energy, whispering the remnants of a forgotten war. Around him, fragments of lost civilizations floated in the void, broken towers, shattered temples, and the skeletal remains of beings far greater than an immortal race. Jex groaned, rolling onto his hands and knees. His blade was still clutched tightly in his grasp, its golden edge flickering in and out of phase. He was not alone. Sykes and Tay materialized next, their forms appearing in bursts of swirling light. They stumbled forward, eyes darting around, taking in the desolate battlefield. Where the hell are we? Sykes muttered, adjusting his grip on his twin daggers. Feels like we just got spit out of existence. Tay's gaze was distant, her hands trembling slightly. I can still hear it. The echoes of the past. The battles that were fought here. It's like this place never moved on. A moment later, Risa appeared, landing with a sharp intake of breath. She rose to her feet quickly, her blade already at the ready. Her golden eyes scanned the ruined landscape, and when they met Jex's, he saw the same realization dawning in her mind. We're at the end of the first war, she whispered. Jex exhaled slowly. The last battlefield, the place where it all fell apart. A shadow flickered across the broken horizon. The entity had arrived. The final test, the air grew heavy. The weight of unspoken truths pressed against them as the entity stepped forward. No longer an amorphous shadow, it had taken form. A towering figure draped in tattered remnants of what might have once been armor, its face obscured by a shifting veil of cosmic darkness. Its sapphire eyes burned with an ancient fire. "You stand where gods once bled," the entity murmured, its voice vibrating through the marrow of their bones. "Where the first betrayal shattered the cycle. Where your kind, your predecessors, failed." Jex raised his sword. "Then we break the cycle. We finish this." The entity tilted its head. "Do you truly believe you can? After so many lifetimes, so many deaths? The weight of eternity is against you, little warrior. You fight in vain." "Maybe," Risa said, stepping beside Jex. "But we're still fighting. That has to count for something." The entity extended its hand, and the sky split. A chorus of screams erupted from the rift as figures from long-forgotten battles emerged. Spectral warriors clad in ancient armor, their faces twisted in endless agony, surged forward. Shadows of the past, bound to the entity's will. Sykes tightened his grip on his daggers. "Guess we're doing this the hard way." Tay took a steady breath. "Like we ever had a choice." Then the battle began. A war beyond time. The first of the spectral warriors lunged, and Jex met them head-on. His blade cleaved through their ghostly forms, but for every one he struck down, two more took its place. These were not mere illusions. They were the echoes of fallen warriors, bound by a force greater than time itself. Rissa's golden light flared as she carved through the horde, each strike burning away the lingering remnants of ancient souls. Beside her, Tay moved like a wraith, her daggers slicing through enemies before they even had a chance to react. Sykes fought with relentless precision, his energy bolts piercing through spectral armor, his movements fluid and instinctive. But the enemy was endless. The entity watched them struggle, its sapphire gaze unreadable. "You are delaying the inevitable," it said. "This war was lost long before you ever took up arms." Jex gritted his teeth. "Then maybe it's time to rewrite history." Summoning every ounce of strength, he surged forward, his blade igniting with pure energy. He struck at the entity, their weapons clashing with a force that sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield. The impact tore through the landscape, shattering ruins and scattering the spectral warriors like dust in a storm. The entity staggered, its form flickering. For the first time, it had been forced to retreat. Sykes let out a sharp laugh. "Did we just make it flinch?" Risa's eyes narrowed. "Then we keep pushing. Don't give it a chance to recover." They pressed forward, each strike forcing the entity to give ground. The battlefield trembled beneath their feet as the balance of power shifted. For the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were winning. But then the sky cracked. The final choice. A deep, unnatural silence fell over the battlefield. The entity rose, its form unraveling into threads of pure darkness. The air hummed with an unbearable force, and Jex suddenly understood. This was it. The moment everything had been leading to. The entity was not invincible, but it was not bound by the same rules of existence. Killing it outright wasn't possible, but sealing it away, that could be done. Jex turned to his team, his voice urgent. "We can't destroy it, but we can trap it. We need to bind it to this place, make sure it never leaves." Risa nodded, already understanding. "That kind of seal will take all of us, and it won't be temporary. It'll be forever." Tay hesitated. "Are we sure about this? There's no coming back." Sykes exhaled, a small smile playing on his lips. "We never were the kind to run away, were we?" Jex grinned. "Then let's do this together, one last time." They raised their weapons, channeling everything they had, every memory, every battle, every sacrifice. The ground shook, and golden light erupted from their blades, wrapping around the entity like chains forged from the dawn of time. The entity screamed, its form twisting, struggling. "You do not understand. This is not the end. It will happen. Again, you will forget. You will fight and fall over and over. Jex's grip tightened. Maybe, but this time it won't be you pulling the strings. With a final surge of power, they sealed the entity away. The battlefield collapsed, the weight of the cycle breaking. The darkness faded. And then, a new beginning. Jex awoke to the sound of waves. He opened his eyes, staring at an unfamiliar sky, the sun warm against his face. The memories of the battle flickered in his mind, but they felt distant, like a dream he couldn't quite grasp. A voice called his name, and he turned to see Rissa standing nearby, watching the horizon. She smiled faintly. "Do you remember?" Jex hesitated. I don't know, but I think we did something important." She nodded. "We always do." As the waves rolled in, as the wind carried the echoes of forgotten wars, they stood together, ready. For whatever came next, the cycle had ended, or perhaps it had just begun. End of Book 1. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.